to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Falu, who is a Director of Corporate Assurance at Totally PLC. Now, I'm going to be saying hello to Falu in a moment, but just to give you a bit of background, Totally PLC is the largest independent provider of urgent treatment centres, which support the NHS. So that basically means that they help to free up A&E staff and help to take the pressure off, and they provide a unique service which helps to reduce A&E waiting times. Now, all of this is backed up by outstanding CQC verifications and also excellent client feedback. But that's not the only service that Totally PLC provides. They also deliver the 111 services, GP out of hours, clinical assessment services, and also integrated urgent care as well. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce you now to Falu. Hi, Falu. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Well, I know that we're going to be talking about the company in a bit more detail, because obviously there are a number of companies within the group, all focused on providing awesome services in the healthcare space. But before we begin, could you just tell me something about you that not many people would know?
Gosh, that's a good question. So I'd have to go back to my boyhood on this question. So when I was a young boy, I really enjoyed taking things apart and then try and put them back together again. So I used to spend my pocket money buying second-hand bikes, which were really, really tatty, and then I would put life back into them. So every weekend, rather than be out playing football with my friends, I would be taking the bikes apart and customizing them just so that they were different to what everybody else had. What it meant for me was I had a different looking bike every week, and my family was going completely mad.
Sounds like a good habit to have, though. And I think kind of looking at what you've been doing with the ISO standards and raising standards, obviously I know that with Totally has grown exponentially over the years. You've got lots of different companies within the group, and one of your roles I know has been bringing that together and looking at how standards are managed across the group. So you could see that there are different parts there to the bicycle that you've brought together, which I'm keen to explore in a bit more detail. So no, thanks for sharing that with us. So talking about Totally PLC, could you go into a bit more detail about the company, please? I know I provided a bit of an overview.
Sure. So I work for Totally PLC, and the company is divided up into three very distinct divisions: urgent care, planned care, and insourcing. Totally is a key partner to the NHS and other sectors providing key quality healthcare services across both the UK and Ireland. Our services range from urgent treatment centres, NHS 111, GP out of hours. We also deliver physiotherapy and other community services, as well as supporting the NHS to reduce waiting times in multiple clinical specialities. And, during this pandemic, Taylor has been working with the NHS to continue supporting patient care so that patients, receive the best care possible during the COVID-19 pandemic. Within each of the divisions, we have separate brands. So if I can say, in urgent care, we have two companies that provide urgent care services, and that is Vocare and Greenbrook. Within planned care, which is a service that provides therapy services and other community services, we have About Health, Optimum and Premier Health, and insourcing, we have Telehealthcare Limited, which supports the NHS to reduce hospital waiting times.
Okay, great. And in your role then as Director of Corporate Assurance, could you just share with us a bit about how that role is involved with ISO standards and raising standards across the group?
Yeah, so my role is Director of Corporate Assurance. So essentially, I help the group to achieve all of its regulatory, statutory and governance duties and functions. The role is spread across all the services, and especially where we have implemented the ISO 27 certificate, which currently sits across all the services, and that is one of the governance supporting roles that I provide across the group.
Okay, great. And so could you just share with me a bit of a kind of a day in the life for Lou in terms of managing the ISO standards? Because I know that you've worked in partnership with Blackmores and Steve Mason for some time now. Could you just share with me a little bit more about what's involved with managing those ISO standards?
Yeah, so working very closely with Blackmores, the way we've been able to manage the ISO standard is through vigorous planning, identifying key responsibilities, updating and renewing policies and objectives, right through to documentation and continual improvement.
Okay, good. And I know that you've been more involved with the information security side, ISO 27001. I mean, what would you say you've learned in terms of how 27001 is used as a best practice mechanism for the group?
Okay, so since I joined Totally and been involved in implementing ISO 27001, managing standards of best practice is really important for processes that you need to work correctly. They are simply the best way to do things and have been worked out through trial and error and found to be the most sensible way to proceed and complete a desirable objective. So for the group, it was important to not only implement the ISO certificate, but to improve the processes and systems that we use to prop up the ISO 27 certificate.
Yeah. And could you provide an example on where some of those improvements have been made over the last couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. So again, with the support of Blackmores, there were some pinch points where we've, especially in the last 18 months, we've put some real focus on. So this is about developing our documentation and turning around the culture for continuous improvement, ensuring that we build on best practice as best as we can so that we're not falling behind or lagging behind. We're always looking over our shoulder to see where other areas of improvement can be made.
Right, yeah, so it's all based on continual improvement. And I think as the group has grown over the years as well, obviously through acquisition, you've inherited different companies' way of working. So what would you say is, in terms of your experience of systemising ways of working, that the ISO standards might help?
Yeah, so ISO 27 is another form of kind of best practice. So using this best practice, it's about taking the time to research what you're planning to do, finding the best way to go about getting it done. Best practices are not limited, they are inherent in all fields and areas of endeavour. So we use the ISO to improve all of our systems and processes to ensure that we can be as sound as possible.
Mm. And so do you have champions within each area of the business then that support you on information security?
Absolutely. So within each of the 3 divisions, we have ISO leads who are responsible for managing and delivering the expectations around the ISO certificate. But what we've been able to do over the last 18 months, and certainly working with Blackmores, is that rather than each division working in silo, what we've been able to put in place is group working, so that there's an accountability right across the group. And what that has meant for the company is that we are very much coherent in implementing ISO 27.
So across the group then, would you say that there's been a shift in terms of communication and clarity around processes and objectives?
Definitely. So one of the benefits of working in a group way rather than each division working individually is that we can have that shared learning across the group, implementing best practice, being able to consistently have an approach for documentation and continual improvement, so that there's a ownership at group level across each of the divisions. So all of the standards are equal and same and not different in other parts of the business.
Great, okay. And if you could give a top tip to somebody who is looking at embarking on going down this journey, not necessarily just ISO 27001, it could be any standard really. I mean, what kind of tip would you give them, Falu?
Gosh, my top tips would be to prepare and research the ISO standard, plan, develop and evolve the standard, and finally, you need to commit to leadership. So the need to get top management commitment may be obvious. In fact, it is a requirement for most of the ISO standards, but too often senior management think it's something they can delegate and forget about. So for Total PLC, this has been a huge paradigm shift and one we are extremely proud of.
Fantastic, yes, because I think initially there were individual businesses that kind of worked in their own way, which is very typical, isn't it, when you have different types of services that are provided by different companies within a group. But it seems like you've done a superb job of aligning all of that to provide that structure and a systemised approach to delivering on those standards and objectives, which I'm sure is going to just help the organisation go from strength to strength. And I think especially at these kind of difficult times that we still face, I know that all organisations have been put under pressure during the pandemic. You must have had even more pressure, I would have thought, delivering the services that you've been delivering totally over the last year or so.
Absolutely. So just like every other healthcare organisation, we have been extremely busy during the pandemic. Ultimately, we've been, supporting the NHS patients, but also importantly, we've been supporting our own staff as well. Which is really, really important to the business. And it's been an extremely tough year as well for all of our companies and divisions. But what we have found is because of the pandemic, it's offered us a window of opportunity to see different ways of how we can deliver healthcare, but ultimately putting patient care at the top, so we don't forget about the quality. We continue to improve.
And that's the basis of the ISO standards as well, isn't it? That plan, do, check, act cycle of continual improvement. So I think it sounds as though it's been put to the test and to very good use over the last year or so whilst we've been going through this pandemic. So yeah, that's good to hear that that's been valuable. Okay, great. And finally, if you could gift a book to somebody, what would it be and why?
Okay, so I love the concept of giving books as a gift. For me, I don't have a specific book in mind, and too many to choose from, so many audiences. Having said this, if I had the talent, I would love to write a book and give that as a gift.
Oh, interesting. And what would you write that book on?
Well, it won't be DIY because I'm absolutely used. I think it would have to be some kind of adventure. Yeah, definitely. Some kind of adventure.
Excellent. And finally, do you have a favourite quote that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Okay, this is a really good question. So for me, I have two favourite quotes. The first one is by J.R. Rim, and it goes, "It's not about making the right choices, it's about making the choices we make and making them right." And the second quote is by Mike Tyson, and it starts, "In life, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth."
That's interesting. Yeah. So, and then what happens next?
That's right. So
exactly. So things don't always go to plan, but you've got to, I guess, plan to not have a plan.
That's right. Yeah. So everybody thinks they have a plan until something happens. And that quote you could apply to every part of human life. So whether it's employment, health, family.
And that's especially true right now with this pandemic that we've all been facing. And I think it's made everybody think differently and change their plans as well. We've had to, but I think you either kind of bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away, or you innovate and you change and you develop. And it sounds as though, just going back to what you were saying about about continual improvement, you've definitely done that and looked at alternative ways of delivering services and made improvements on that. That's something that we've done at Blackmores as well. I mean, last year it made us look at how consultancy services were delivered, and we're looking at offering online services in 2021. So I think I love those two quotes. I'm glad you put two in as opposed to just one.
They are very, very different quotes, two ends of the spectrum there.
But still about making decisions, though, in some respects. About you may have a plan, but it doesn't always mean that that's going to carry on going to plan, and it's about making the right choices when the time's right. So that's great. Well, thanks so much, Falu, for sharing your experience and knowledge. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Good. So that's just one other thing that I wanted to mention, actually, for ISO show listeners. If you'd like to hear more about one of the companies within the Totally Group, we recorded an interview with David Ango from Optimum, which is episode 6, I believe. So there's a bit more information there about experience on 9001 and 27001 within the group as well. So yeah, thanks once again, Falu.
No, you're very welcome.
Great. And I look forward to catching up with our ISO show listeners on the next episode of the ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.